Hi everyone, a very good evening. Everyone who is here who's joining us for our webinar. My name is Bhavna Dukal and I am here representing the SIUK team. First and foremost, thank you everyone who has joined us for our webinar today and welcoming all the students, parents and professors who actually have taken out time and investing your time during this pandemic. On that note, few of you may not know what SIUK is and perhaps what we do. So just quick introduction on SIUK. SIUK is a global organization with its presence spread across 50 countries. We are the official representatives of UK universities. We assist students across the globe to seek admission in the top universities with premium servicing for Oxbridge, Russell Group, and other non-Russell Group universities. In case you need extra information on our service, requesting everyone to visit our website, that is www.studying-uk.in. So on that, I would like to introduce our key speakers of the webinar today, and they are Dr. Gareth and Dr. Patrick. So thank you so much for being here today, and we are not able to thank you enough for having you here and helping students to find reasons to study psychology as a subject. So floor is all yours.
Thank you ever so much. Hello, everybody, and a very big greeting from Newcastle and Newcastle University. I hope you're all well. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar and for listening and for your interest in psychology at Newcastle University. My name is Patrick Rosenkrantz, and I'm going to take you through the first half of the talk, and then my colleague Gareth Richards will speak about research in psychology. Okay, so we've got a small presentation prepared that we're going to go. You can see it in front of you, the first slide. We're going to talk over this presentation to you, and then later on there'll be time for some questions. Okay, so who are we? My name is Patrick Rosenkrantz. As I said, here is a fairly outdated photo. Now I've just shaved my beard off. So it is, in fact, me. I am the program director for undergraduate studies in psychology at Newcastle University. I'm a senior lecturer in psychology. I'm also together with my colleague Gareth, who is a teaching fellow in psychology. We're both the international leads. So part of our job is to speak to students from different countries about our programs. We enjoy traveling a lot, and especially to India. Gareth and I have recently, last year, been to India. Here are some photos of us at our last trip. Here you can see us at the Taj Mahal and looking at some of the wonderful scenery in Surrey. So we love coming to your country and speaking to you. This time we're on online and web. Hopefully very soon we can come and visit you again. And otherwise, hopefully you can come and see Newcastle. Newcastle is a lovely place to be. Here's a picture of our famous bridges and the Tyne, the big river that runs through Newcastle. The building in the far at the far end is the Sage, a big concert hall. Newcastle has a lot of shopping, one of the most beautiful shopping streets in Britain, often voted by the Times. It's got a lot of culture, a lot of things going for it. It's very cosmopolitan. Here's another picture. This is the city centre. This is Gray's Monument. And you can see the Gregorian architecture. And of course, there's always blue skies in Newcastle. Well, not always, but we also have lovely beaches. So Newcastle has a lot to offer as a city, both nature and culture, as well as things like beaches, sports activities, concerts, and of course, our university. So Newcastle University is right at the city centre and with easy access to all of these features. So what am I going to talk about today? Very briefly, this is the overview. What I'm going to tell you about what psychology is. I mean, I think all of you probably know what psychology is. Some of you might have already studied it at undergraduate level. Some of you might be interested in studying it at postgraduate levels, but I'm just going to briefly say what is psychology and how do we conceptualize it, and what is our philosophy of teaching it. Then I'm going to talk about a selection of our psychology programs at postgraduate level, so mainly our master's programs. Then Gareth is going to talk to you about some of the research, and the reason research is so important for a psychology program is that our philosophy is very research-led. So that means that, you know, the cutting edge research that people are doing in psychology feeds directly into the way we teach our programs. And I'll end then at the, after Garrett's section to briefly speak about some of the things you can do with psychology, both in terms of employability and for life in general. Okay, so let's start. What is psychology? Many people think that psychology is all about understanding other people, about reading minds, about talking and listening to other people's problems. And that is, of course, true. Psychology has a lot of mind reading. Psychology has a lot of understanding other people embedded in it. But at university, and especially at Newcastle University, psychology is seen as a science. So psychology is the scientific investigation of the mind and of behavior. More colloquially, we can say the study of how humans and other animals think and act, react and interact. So psychology is hugely broad. It means that it interacts with pretty much anything that humans do, because in anything that humans do, humans act and think, react to stimuli from outside, from the environment, and from stimuli from inside, from the inner environment. So psychology as a subject can pretty much be applied to any section of human affairs. The emphasis here is that it's a scientific investigation. So it's not about opinion and it's not about authority. It's about empirical investigation of the various aspects in which psychology acts. Okay. From a student perspective, this means that we are very data-driven. We are driven by empirical research, but we're also driven by the fact that psychology needs to empower you to be used in all aspects of life. We call this capacity psychological literacy. So this is defined as the general capacity to adaptively and intentionally apply psychology to meet personal, professional, and societal needs. This philosophy runs through all of our programs, that what we want for our graduates is that they are able to use the research that we teach, the theories, the concepts that we teach in any aspect of life. So for your personal life, how you behave yourself and interact with other people, for your professional life, how to convince people of the veracity of your arguments, and how to present yourself well, and how to critically evaluate information that is put to you in the workplace, and of course prepare you for specific careers. And more broadly, psychology has to prepare you for the needs of society. There are global social issues that psychology is very, very well placed to address, from sustainability to climate change to various political situations, to financial situations. So psychology, so the main philosophy and aim of our programs is to create students and graduates that have the highest sort of psychological literacy. Okay, so how do we do that? So we have a number of programs at Newcastle, both undergraduate and postgraduate. Today I'm going to talk about two in particular, two of our master's programs, because I believe that's most likely the programs that you're most interested in. If there are any other things you're interested in later that I don't mention, please feel free to ask questions later on. So the postgraduate programs that we offer and that I'm going to talk about today are two master's programs. We have Foundations in Clinical Psychology and the Masters of Science in Forensic Psychology. We also have a doctorate in clinical psychology, but in order to go into this doctorate in clinical psychology, you need psychological work experience, and many people also want to have a master's in clinical psychology before they think about doing the doctorate. So what I'm going to focus on today are these two master's programs. Okay, let's start with the foundations in clinical psychology. Clinical psychology is what most people see as the archetypical area of psychology. Clinical psychology deals with mental health issues, and this particular course will introduce you at a postgraduate level to clinical psychology. Through expert-led clinical health and forensic psychology, you will learn how to research and apply the various perspectives of clinical psychology in a cultural and historical setting. The course is, as all of our courses, is highly focused on practical applicability as well as research-led. So both research apprenticeships will be part of the course. So some of the outcomes of the course, what do you gain from doing the MSc in clinical psychology? You will have knowledge and understanding of theories and research methods of clinical psychology, be able to assess and synthesize information, formulating arguments. And just to point out, for instance, that even if you, after completing this course, you don't want to go into clinical psychology, but want to do something else with it, this kind of skill is really important. Being able to assess and synthesize information is something that's a graduate attribute that's very global. Of course, we will focus also on things like the professional contexts in which clinical psychologists work, so that those of you who do want to, those of the students who do want to work in as clinical psychologists have the best professional start. And of course, the course is very much focused on the various aspects of therapy and interventions in mental health issues. So the conditional etiology, maintaining factors, interventions and therapies associated with clinical psychology. Okay, just to give you an overview of how the course would look, it's a one-year course. And the various modules that you would be taking would be things like professional issues in clinical health and forensic psychology, advanced research methods for applied psychology, cultural and historical issues, health psychology and principles of behavior change. Then in the second trimester, you would be becoming more applied, using these core knowledges through either research apprenticeships or some of the other modules, things like advanced topics and disorders of development, legal psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, or interoception, so the body, the mind, and the self, interoception and body awareness, and how that relates to mental health. The final trimester is your actual dissertation. Here you will conduct some clinical research, and I'll not speak much about that because my colleague Gareth will go into much more detail about that in a second. Okay, so that's the foundation in clinical psychology. So obviously this is very much focused on clinical psychology, but there is a little bit of forensic psychology embedded in this. But if you're interested in actually becoming a forensic psychologist, we have a specialized master's in forensic psychology. So this is the second course I want to talk about briefly today. So the MSc in forensic psychology. This course will provide you with advanced understanding of the theoretical and applied issues in forensic psychology. It's very much a scientist practitioner approach, meaning that it prepares you both for the research aspect as well as the actual practical aspect of working in a professional setting as a forensic psychologist. Similarly to the clinical psychology, this course has a broad range of knowledge and skills outcomes. A lot of these are, of course, very much focused on being a forensic psychologist, but again, many of the skills that you will learn are applicable to all sorts of professions. So things like applied theories and ethical issues and the evaluation of research and practice. You'll get training in advanced research methods. The whole approach is evidence-based and applied, understanding of assessment, case formulation, treatment, and management of offenders. So here the professional skills become really pronounced. It gives you an overview of the interdisciplinary nature of forensic psychology in various contexts, especially that of the legal system, and how psychological knowledge can be applied to the courts and to criminal justice systems. and it has a strong component of investigative psychology and forensic interviewing, which is one of the research strengths with Newcastle. Okay, so the forensic psychology is a very distinctive program. It's only one of only 6 universities in the Russell Group, so the Ivy League of the UK universities, if you will. Russell Group are usually research-intensive elite universities. So it's only one of 6 that host such a programs, and we have a lot of links with various forensic organizations, such as the Northumbrian Police, the Prison Service, the NHS, of course, also strong ties internationally to the Norwegian Police University College and so forth. So this gives you a really good opportunity to not only study the theories, but apply these in professional settings. So some of the opportunities are there that the Prison Service and the Northumbria Police to practically work there with in these professional contexts. We have also strong professional links with the International Criminal Court and the International Investigative Interviewing Research Groups, one of the prime research groups internationally in this sector. Okay, so as I already mentioned a number of times, part of our teaching philosophy is research-led. All of the cutting-edge knowledge that we try to convey in our programs is based on primary research. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Gareth Richards now, who's going to talk a bit about the research that we do in the school.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So everyone, Patrick's going to be running the slide transitions from the other side of Newcastle. So we're going to see how this goes. Anyway, thanks for the introduction. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the research that we do as part of both the forensic and the clinical master's programs that Patrick's just told you about. And there we go. There's a seamless slide transition. Okay, so what I've done here for you is I've just outlined a couple of individuals within our group about the sort of research that they do. As Patrick says, this is very much in our philosophy that we use research-based teaching. So we like to sort of embed our research within what we're actually doing on the courses. Now, there are many different people in our school, and they work in a number of different areas, but I've highlighted just a couple here who might be particularly interesting. So this is Dr. Liz Evans, who works in the areas body image, obesity, and weight management. Particular interest in eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia nervosa. But to sort of give you a little bit of a flavor for what the purpose of the research is, it's not just academic research. In this case, Liz works in a very sort of applied manner. So you can see, for example, that she's helped develop a smartphone intervention, which this helps people who lost weight to keep, to maintain their weight loss. And now talk to you about somebody who's involved more in the forensic side of psychology. So this is Faye Horsley. So she's approached the particularly interesting question of why do people start fires, which this wasn't a question that I'd really thought about very much until I was talked to Faye about it, but it's a really fascinating research area. So she looks at fire starting obviously from the forensic side of things in terms of criminal activity, but she looks at it also from the sort of the whole continuum of fire starting behavior. So from sort of normal ways that people would use fire in their day-to-day lives, all the way up to very dangerous and criminal activities like what leads people to arson attack and things like this. And like with what I was just saying about with Liz's research, so Faye's research is particularly applied as well. So for example, she's been working with the fire and rescue services, sort of embedding her findings from her research that can help them sort of develop and evaluate engagement activities to try to help reduce these harmful behaviors in society. Okay, so I think a question a lot of students often ask is, if they're particularly interested in research, is what sort of things could I get involved in? if I studied at Newcastle. So what I'm going to do now is give you a real sort of quick case study of a project that I supervised last year from some of the students on the MSc Foundations in Clinical Psychology program. I'll tell you a little bit about sort of what we did, how we did it, what the students did, what we found out, and hopefully where we're going to go from here. Okay, so a little bit of background for you. So this is a lot of the research that I do is quite theoretically based, but it's also often quite applicable to certain areas clinically as well. So we know that couples, so in this case, we're talking about heterosexual dating couples, that they're often quite similar in certain ways. So for example, tall people are more likely to be partnered with other tall people. People who've gone to university are more likely to marry somebody else who's been to university, etc. Now, what I'm going to talk about here is whether people might also be similar in certain psychological characteristics and characteristics that might be of relevance to clinical conditions. So I'm going to talk about something called the reading the mind in the eyes test. Okay, so if you see on the screen here, the way this test works is that you see a series of pictures of the eye region of someone's face, and you can see on the screen these 4 words to describe what this person might be thinking and feeling. So what this does is you have to then choose which word you think represents essentially the way that this person is thinking. And what this does is it gives us an indication of how good somebody's sort of empathizing skills are. Are they good at reading emotions in other people? And we know that the ability to read emotions in other people is particularly related to a number of clinical conditions, such as autism and also in certain personality disorders. So these are the people that worked with me on this project. So you can see at the top left, we have Dr. John Galvin, who's at Birmingham. It says Birmingham University. He's actually at Birmingham City University. And at the bottom left, we have Professor Simon Baron-Cohen, who is based at the University of Cambridge. Baron-Cohen actually came up with the reading the mind in the eyes test that I just showed you. So I've worked with those individuals on this project, but then you can see these other 4 people who are my master students on the program. So Manya and Ananya have worked with me as research apprentices. So they've been working, helping sort of collect data and things like this on the project. And then you can see Ben and Ellie who've worked on this project for their dissertations. So this will make up quite a large part of their degree program. But something to sort of highlight here is it's not just a sort of you do a research project because it's part of the program. It's more to sort of highlight that actually we have a lot of collaborations with other universities and we're doing this research. So hopefully it can be, you know, something useful and not just something that has to be done for you to pass your course. Okay, so what we did here is we asked people to come into the lab. So this is like what Manya, Ananya, Ben and Ellie would have done is that they brought couples into the lab. We gave them each of the couples a £10 Amazon voucher for their troubles, which is great. And we essentially asked people to do the same tests as each other without conferring with their partner. You can see we've got a fairly large range of ages. We've got from 18 to 76 years old here between the males and females, which is hopefully quite representative of, you know, sort of the general population. Of the 58 couples who came into the lab, we have 55 of them completed the eyes test that I've just shown you. So what we wanted to see was, are people more similar in their ability to recognize emotion in people's faces to their partner? And if we see on the next slide, that this is very preliminary data. So this is quite exciting that this hasn't been published yet. This is our very first sort of initial findings where we've looked at this. What we found, if you look on the graph, people who have higher scores, so females who have higher scores on the reading the mind in the eyes test, tend to have male partners who also have high scores on this this test. So essentially, people who are good at reading the mind in people's eyes are more likely to be partnered with other people who are good at this, and those who are not so good at it are more likely to be partnered with with people who are not so good at it. And this can hopefully give us some indication of a better understanding of these processes that can then hopefully be understood within a clinical context. Okay, so as I said, I wanted to sort of highlight the utility of the research that we do here, and that what our students do is actually useful and can contribute more than simply just that they need to do this for the course. So Manu and Ananya have created posters for this that sort of like for academic conferences that they would present as part of their course. Ben and Ellie are writing this up for their dissertations as we speak. And I'm going to write up a paper for submission to a peer-reviewed journal. And some of my students will likely be on this paper, having contributed considerably to the project. So this is the kind of thing that, again, is sort of good CV value that people can contribute at research throughout the different levels, and hopefully get more out of the project than simply having done it because it's a part of the dissertation. And if we go on the next slide, so I wanted to say before I hand you back to Patrick, that what I've talked about here is a real snippet of what we have to offer. We have a wide range of different research that's represented within our school. This is from clinical and forensic stuff, but also lots of other areas. We have, for example, people interested in biological psychology and evolutionary psychology, visual perception, and all kinds of things. We also have people using a range of different research methods. So you can see with the study that I talked about, this was bringing people into the lab, and they've done this study where they look at emotions in people's eyes. But we also have lots of other different types of research methods that people use. And there are opportunities to get involved in research at Newcastle, all the way from sort of the first year of undergraduate up until master's programs, doctoral research, etc. So if you're interested in any of this, I'm going to be around afterwards. Please do ask me any questions. And now I will hand you back to Patrick.
Hi, Nidhi. It seems there is a connection loss.
I'm not sure, Preeti, because we are able to be connected.
Okay, because I think for some reason Patrick has lost his connection.
I think yes, it's Patrick's connection that have got lost.
Okay, okay. No problem. So I think he must be trying to get onto the network.
Yeah, he just messaged me and said Zoom just broke down. So
okay, no problem. Gareth, would you want to continue if we have more slides?
I can if you want to. I've not really looked so much at Patrick's slides, but I can give it a go. I would say if we maybe wait like a minute or two in case he's
Sure.
able to come back, and if
Sure.
not, then I'll have a very quick look at what's on here. I've got the slides, so
Sure. Sure. Nidhi, just wanted to check, have we started to get some questions alongside?
Yes, we have started getting.
Yeah, great. So is it fine? Let's wait for Patrick to join back in a couple of minutes.
Sure.
okay. Yeah, I have the slides here. So if Patrick's not able, I'll take over. I'm happy to go whenever you are. I'm aware that people might be sitting thinking it's
right. Yeah, I think Gareth, it's good if you can just you can just talk more about psychology. Meanwhile, Patrick will join.
Fine. I'll hang on. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm on. I'm just gonna. Okay, so I've got from where we were. I'm ready to go whenever, so let me know.
Yeah. I think we can start and Patrick can join.
Yes.
Are we linked up now? Can I start talking?
Yeah, we
Okay.
can see you.
Unfortunately, we've lost Patrick briefly, but hopefully he will be back when the internet starts behaving itself again. So I'm gonna fill in for him quickly to talk about careers in psychology. So there are a number of different routes that you can take with studying psychology. And what we've talked about today, obviously, a lot of people who are attending this are probably quite interested in the more applied side of psychology. So, for example, working as a clinical psychologist or indeed as a forensic psychologist. And so what I wanted to do is tell you a little bit about the sort of typical career trajectory that might be typical of these types of psychologists. So typically people will do an undergraduate in psychology. This is not necessarily the case. A lot of people who study at postgraduate level have done similar or indeed quite different disciplines before studying on a master's program. But having then studied, say, clinical psychology or forensic psychology, people often then go towards the sort of professional psychology route. So, for example, to be a clinical psychologist, people would then need to gain work experience and then complete, in the UK, we do a DClin Psy degree. We also have the doctorate in forensic psychology as well that goes towards this sort of direction. People also, however, don't always follow the professional psychology route and often study psychology and then end up doing other things. We know that our undergraduates at Newcastle, about 80% of undergraduates actually go and work in areas other than psychology afterwards. And this makes essentially studying psychology a very good sort of all-round degree that you can do lots of things with it. Which is something that we wanted to highlight. So, for example, a lot of people go into things like teaching, sales and marketing, market research, lots of different things that can be done with this kind of degree. So we've got a couple of people here. Actually, Patrick is back, and Patrick knows these individuals. So, Patrick, do you want to talk about their particular career trajectories?
Yeah. Sorry for dropping out. My connection just was severed there. So yeah, as Gareth has mentioned, there's two major trajectories for careers in psychology, either in professional psychology or pretty much anything else. And both our master's courses really focus on professional psychology. But if you choose to then go into something else, you have a broad range of skills, the psychological literacy that will let you achieve, very high levels. Here are two people who've gone through these two career pathways. This is my friend and colleague, Hannah Gieselman. She did an undergraduate degree in psychology and then a PhD in psychology and then the doctorate in clinical psychology. So she went through the whole spectrum of professional training in psychology. She's now a consultant clinical psychology working here in the Northeast with helping deaf children and their parents to interact. She's running her own service. So she's gone very far through the whole suite of programs that we have to offer and works at a very high level. This is Lawrence, who also did the BSc in psychology. And then instead of going into professional psychology, he decided he wanted to go into finance. And he is now an financial consultant at a big firm at Newcastle. And he came to speak to our students about 2 years ago, just to see how he used his knowledge in psychology in order to become better at speaking to clients in the financial sector and making decisions, evaluating evidence, and so forth. So I guess the take-home message really is that with psychology has real applicability in all sectors of life. Yes, it's very professional and vocationally focused, forensic psychology, clinical psychology, or some of the other professions that are there in psychology, but all of the skills and the research skills and the transferable skills that we teach are applicable to very many other professions and careers. Okay, if you would just change the slide, Gareth, and we'll just finish off the presentation. So just to summarize then, we've talked a bit about the programs at Newcastle and about the research-led philosophy of the programs, and a little bit about careers. So why would you choose psychology at Newcastle? Well, we're very dedicated as a team at the school to high quality teaching and student employability. We have dedicated teaching staff that are their main profession is to train psychologists, but we also have members of staff that are internationally known researchers that have broad research interests and expertise, both in the professional field and in the research field. And as students, you benefit from studying with these active researchers and professionals. Okay, I think that's it from us for the presentation part of the session. So thank you very much for your patience and for your attention. And I think we can now take any questions that you want to have. If you want to contact us directly, you can use this email address here to get in touch with us and ask any questions if we don't answer them now in the session, the Q&A session following this presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gareth and Dr. Patrick, for such an insightful session. So the first question is, I would like to know if the university assists with the BPS registration process.
So that depends on where you are in the registration process. So I can speak a little bit about that. I work I accredit degrees for the BPS. So in order to have a BPS, the graduate basis for registration, you need to have studied psychology at undergraduate level and need to have covered all of the areas that the BPS requires. Now, British undergraduate programs are usually accredited by the BPS. So once you graduate, you automatically have it. Indian psychology programs in other countries, like in India, aren't automatically accredited. So you need to write to the BPS and say, this is what I've studied, can you accredit me? So this process, your question is, can we help with this process? I think a short answer is yes, we can help with this process, but there's actually not much that we as academics can do other than say, well, write to the BPS, because then the BPS will look at your degree program and say, okay, you've got all of the requirements, you can have the BPS accreditation, or you're missing a little bit, you might need to kind of do a conversion course or do another course in cognitive psychology or something in order to get this accreditation. So it's best to contact the BPS directly if you want accreditation for your program that you've studied prior to coming to Newcastle. Now, there's another thing about accreditation. The Masters in Forensic Psychology that I spoke about has two routes. One is accredited by the BPS and the other is not accredited by the BPS. In fact, they're the exact same master's program, but if you come in and want to study a forensic psychology and you don't have the BPS accredited degree from the undergraduate, then you go and study the non-accredited route at Newcastle. If you, for whatever reason, have BPS accreditation prior, then you can study the accredited route at Newcastle. Now, why would anybody not want to study the accredited route? Well, there are many different reasons. If you want to work in a different country, for instance, you might not need to have the British Psychological Society accreditation. Or if you not yet have the BPS accreditation for your undergraduate degree, then you might want to study the master's first and get the accreditation later, which you can. You can always, it'll be, the master's can be accredited retrospectively if you get the GBR, the graduate basis for registration, later. Okay, so that was a lot of information. Now I think to summarize, the best port of call, the best person to speak to about BPS accreditation for undergraduate degrees would be the BPS itself. If you have questions about the accreditation of the master's program, the best email address would be is the one that's on the slide now, and that if there's specific help you need, and that email would get to the program director for the master's directly, and we can then take it from there and help with any specific question. And I think Preeti is also a good point of contact for any question, because she can then directly link it either to myself or to my colleagues who run the master's programs. I hope that answers the question sufficiently.
Absolutely, Dr. Patrick. So next question is, are Indian students eligible for forensic psychology course?
So the answer is yes, of course you are eligible to study the forensic psychology course. Again, which route you would go, accredited or non-accredited, would depend on what you did before. So if you want to ask questions about your specific circumstances, again, it's probably best to email us to say, okay, this is where I'm at, this is where I studied undergraduate psychology, or this is my degree in a different subject. How do I go on about go now to do the accredited or non-accredited route? So, but as a general answer, yes, Indian students are completely eligible to study forensic psychology here.
I don't know if Preeti, you might want to add anything about the process and perhaps also about scholarships and things like this at this point.
Right. Thanks, Gareth. Well, as my academics have said, yes, you can apply to our university being an Indian student. Of course, there is an academic requirement that you have to fulfill, and it might vary from 60% to 65% of your undergrad, depending upon what university you've studied from. But then this is a very simple process of you applying to Newcastle online, and you can do it through our friendly PG application portal. So we are open for September intake. If you are looking at applying for this year, you can still apply. All you'll have to do is go on to the application portal on our website and then log in and then fill up the form and attach your documents. And more, if you need more help, then of course, you are in very safe hands of SIUK, who've organized this event. You can get in touch with them, or you can get in touch with me. They will, if you get in touch with them, they'll make you get in touch with me. So a very helpful SIUK they are. And I'll strongly recommend, you come, you talk to us, because there are various options that we can help you with. In terms of scholarships, we have a very helpful scholarship, which is known as Vice Chancellor International Scholarship. And this is still open. And this is offered to the offer holders with some level of scores. And this is automatic. So you don't have any competition with any other offer holder. If you are interested in that, please go onto the website, have a look. It's very much written in detail, but then of course, feel free, get in touch with us anytime. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Preeti. So next question is, what is the job opportunities after completing foundations in clinical psychology? Students can apply for jobs in other countries also after completing the course.
Sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question, please?
Can students apply for jobs in other countries as well after completing this clinical psychology course?
Mm-hmm. So the Foundations in Clinical Psychology Masters gives you a master's level qualification, obviously. However, and you're then eligible to apply for all sorts of jobs. However, if you want to become a clinical psychologist, either in Britain or internationally, you will have to do a further qualification. So in Britain, to become a clinical psychologist, it is a requirement that you do the doctorate in clinical psychology. But if you want to work in other related fields, you want to work as a therapist, or you want to work in mental health as a mental health consultant, or these kind of fields, you can apply for those jobs after the master's. If you want to be a clinical psychologist, that requires further study. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Patrick. So next question is, having a non-clinical psychological background, but a good amount of experience in counseling, enable me to take up the clinical psychology?
I think typically, it sounds like the person asking the question has a good background for this stuff. It's a matter of, I guess this goes back to what Patrick was saying in terms of if you want to be a clinical psychologist and practice clinically, that you would eventually need to go and do the clinical doctorate. However, having a background in this area would certainly make somebody well suited to the foundations in clinical masters that we run here. And that can be seen maybe as a sort of a stepping stone towards then moving towards aiming to get the doctorate in clinical psychology. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but essentially, yes, that background would certainly be relevant. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Patrick, or...
I think so everything that Gareth says, I agree with, and specifically, if you want to join the Foundations in Clinical Psychology, we take any related psychology. Of course, is the most common subject that people have studied, but counselling is a related field, so that would be entirely appropriate to have studied prior to taking this master's course. Usually what we look for in students is that they have performed well consistently throughout their previous degree, and that you have some evidence of research excellence and research ability. In terms of the specific academic requirement, it would depend on the qualification that you have, and I'll pass on to Preeti for that.
So as Patrick and Gareth has said, this is good. If you have a relevant experience in counseling, that will really help. We would still be looking at certain level of psychology study while you've done your standard 12, but at the same time your undergrad. So I think if it is a very particular case, I would suggest if you get in touch with us directly, because we won't be able to give a generic answer to special cases. It is always that we go through your profile, and then we can help you and we can support you with an answer of yes, you should apply, or maybe not. But for sure, your relevant experience will help. I'll suggest please come and talk to the India office directly.
All right. Thank you for the answer. So the next question is, what is the full memberships offered at forensic psychology and membership required for clinical psychology?
So are you referring to membership of the British Psychological Society?
Yes.
Okay, so the Masters in Forensic Psychology is fully accredited. In order to go through the accredited route, which gives you full membership eligibility, you need to come in to the Masters with an accredited, or with the so-called graduate basis of recognition from the BPS. So you can get this, if you don't have this, but you still want to study the Forensic Psychology Masters, you can do this. And that's when you go into the non-accredited route. And if you then later on get this BPS graduate basis for registration, which is usually given after an undergraduate degree, if you get that, then your master's will also be converted to the accredited master's. So it's full membership is possible, but the way the British Psychological Society works is that you have these different stages of registration. And the first stage is the graduate basis of registration, which comes usually with your undergraduate degree. Okay, so the master's is a postgraduate degree, and dependent on your prior membership of the BPS, it will switch to that. So I hope I've addressed that question. Again, I think with specific cases, the best thing to do is to get in touch with us, because we can then, give you more specific answers given a specific query. I hope that answers, or at least addresses it in general.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Next question is there any scholarship for international students? Perhaps Preeti has answered this.
Yeah, but I just want to add on there, Bhavna, that I think I did not mention the amount initially. So I repeat again, this is Vice Chancellor International Scholarship, and it is offered to all our offer holders depending upon their scores in their graduation. The amount of the scholarship is between £1,500 to £5,000. And as I said, it is automatic, and you don't have to apply for the scholarship. All you'll have to do is, if you are happy with the course, see the course content, see whether you fit in well, then you apply to us, apply for the course through our PG application portal. And then once we actually make a decision, and hopefully if we make you an offer, then at the same time, we'll also see where you stand in terms of scholarship. And then one scholarship will be offered to you, which will be between £1,500 to £5,000. So you don't have to apply specifically for the scholarship, as I mentioned earlier. And these scholarships are still available. So I would highly recommend students who are looking at this intake, please have a look on our website. And if you are happy with the course, then I'll encourage you to apply.
All right. Thank you so much for the answer. And the next question is, what are the placement opportunities in clinical psychology?
Okay, the placement opportunities, well, we have strong ties to the NHS, the National Health Service, in which all clinical psychology operates within the UK. So also, we obviously at Newcastle University have many clinical research institutes. So the kind of placement that you can do would be either with in actual, and of course Newcastle itself has a number of hospitals and mental health institutions and services that we have ties with, that you can volunteer for or do a placement with. So there's either the NHS in clinical psychological services, or with the Institute of Neuroscience, a research placement working with either psychiatrists or cognitive neuroscientists with doing clinical research, or in various hospitals around the city. Gareth, do you want to add anything to that?
I was going to say that I think we also have quite good links with Northumbria Police if interested in forensic sort of stuff. I know that quite a lot of our undergraduates in particular have done their placement years with Northumbria Police. So I would have thought there would be similar opportunities like this with the forensic masters as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, what about the scope and qualifications of industrial or organizational psychologists?
Okay, so we don't offer a master's in organizational psychology. So usually there are, however, masters in the country that offer that specific training in occupational psychology and industrial psychology. So if it's this professional pathway in organizational psychology that you're interested in, my suggestion would be to, I'm just looking at some slides to see if I have information. My suggestion would be to focus more on on looking at universities offer a professional degree in occupational psychology. The other thing to say is that training in psychology general equips you with a lot of the skills to be quite, quite fluid in do graduate training schemes or work in big companies quite quickly. So for instance, I gave you the example of Lawrence Provost earlier, who went into a financial company with a psychology degree. Yes, he did some further training in the financial sector, but it gives you a very sound backing to work in these sectors. For the professional pathway into occupational psychology, it's usually required that you do then go on to do a postgraduate training in occupational psychology. Unfortunately, Newcastle doesn't offer one of those. But there are plenty of universities in the UK that do.
All right. Thank you for the answer. And next question is, how much salary I can expect after completing the degree?
I guess that really depends on what you go on and do with it. As we tried to highlight earlier, that there are a number of different routes that you can take with a psychology degree, and that's not undergraduate or master's level or doctorate level or whatever. It's quite difficult to provide a specific answer. What you could do though is, if you have an idea of a particular area that you want to work in, is to have a look at that specifically. If you work as a clinical psychologist in the NHS, you'd be able to have you could find, for example, typical sort of starting salary for jobs like this will be available online. But equally, if you decide after doing your degree that you want to go teach in a school or something like this, the salary will be really quite different. So unless there's anything sort of more specific, I don't know how much a clinical or forensic psychologist typically earns, probably more than me. But yeah, Patrick, I don't know. Do you have any more sort of insights into that?
Yeah, so for undergraduate psychologists, the kind of average starting salary is around £20,000. So this can obviously vary. As a yardstick, the salary that a trainee clinical psychologist gets, so those doing the doctorate in clinical psychology, is also around 21,000. With a master's, you would expect this to be higher, your starting salary, than with an undergraduate, but it's entirely dependent on what you go into. Trained clinical psychologists can earn up to £80,000 in the they earn similar to consultants and GPs, but of course not every clinical psychologist goes to that high level. So I think that's the kind of yardstick. So it's really very dependent on what the job is. But on average, at undergraduate level, I'd say, after undergraduate level, I say around 20,000 K is the kind of average. And you can expect that to be higher after a master's level.
All right, thank you for the answer. Next question is, do I have to pass any similar or equal exam to start career as individual practitioner?
This is dependent on what country you want to work in as a practitioner. Different countries have different requirements of what professional exam one has to take. So my expertise is mainly for the UK, and there it depends on what profession we spoke of. If you want to be qualified to practice as a clinical psychologist, the requirements are that you complete the doctorate in clinical psychology. If you have this doctorate in clinical psychology, then you have, that's the qualification, that's the exam. And of course you have what's called continual professional development, even as a qualified clinical psychologist, where on the job you get supervision and further development. For forensic psychologists, there are two stages to professional qualification. The first is the master's. So the master's gives you what's called in forensic psychology the stage 1 qualification, And then you can start working as a forensic psychologist. And as you gain experience, either on the job or by then later on completing a doctorate in forensic psychology, you get the so-called stage 2 qualification. So there are other ways into going into profession. If you want to work, for instance, as a counselor, you would do a 3-year counseling degree, and that would give you that profession. Or if you wanted to work as a cognitive behavioral therapist, for instance, you could do a cognitive behavioral therapy certificate, for instance. So there are different levels. It depends on what profession we're talking about specifically. So again, clinical psychologist, you would do the doctorate. Forensic psychologist, you would do stage 1, so that's the master's, and then later on the stage 2 qualification. Yeah.
Thank you for the answer. And the last query is, can students from humanities background go for psychiatry?
I think for psychiatry, is that the question?
Yes, but I think he meant psychology as a subject.
Okay. So that would be very dependent on what you did in as a humanities. So and how are you asking, is the student asking about the clinical psychology or forensic psychology?
Well, he didn't mention this.
Just to jump in quickly as well, if you want to do psychiatry as opposed to psychology, this typically requires that you go to med school. So it wouldn't be a matter of that you can just do a clinical psychology master's and then go and be a practicing psychiatrist. I think the route that you'd need to take to do that would be to do grad entry medicine. You could, if you have a humanities background and you want to go and do psychology, by all means you can do this. It depends on, I mean, I'm sure Preeti will probably know better in terms of the entry requirements and things like this, as we discussed earlier about somebody who had a counselling background. That obviously we do look essentially people who will have a background relevant to psychology. Humanities obviously covers a lot of different things, so some things are going to be more relevant than others. It's certainly possible, but if you wanted to do specifically psychiatry, it would be quite a sort of around the houses approach, I guess you'd have to take, which would be something like grad entry medicine and then doing further study to be specifically in psychiatry, I think.
Yeah, and we don't offer psychiatry. We're not psychiatrists.
Sorry to interrupt, but he just mentioned clinical psychology.
Yeah. Yeah, so everything Gareth says for psychology goes, psychiatry is a different subject. But so how to get into psychology, it's entirely dependent on what you did in the humanities. I think we would consider it for entrance into clinical psychology if you have, for the master's, if you have a sufficient psychology background in your humanities parts. But if it's completely, if you just studied history, for instance, or something like that, then we would first recommend a conversion course into psychology, which can be helpful because that would give you all the necessary background in psychology.
Right. I just want to mention here, in terms of Indian qualification, many universities like Delhi University as well. So we have psychology, which is offered at the humanities side of it, but that's all fine. So if you have done a graduation which is in psychology, you can surely apply to us because we understand that you've gained good and in-depth information and knowledge on psychology. But as Patrick said, if this is something else and where you have 1 or 2 modules on psychology, then I would recommend please speak to us in the first instance. Thank you.
Just to sort of reiterate, in case there wasn't, if anything I said wasn't quite clear, Psychiatry, you would definitely need the sort of the medical route, but for clinical psychology, you would go the route of eventually doing a doctorate in clinical psychology. So for clinical, although clinical psychology and psychiatry are quite similar in a lot of ways, the pathways to get to either of those is different. You wouldn't need to go to med school to be able to be a clinical psychologist. You would go down the route of eventually doing a doctorate in clinical psychology. Hopefully that's sort of clarified everything.
Absolutely. So this was the last query. And so that's it. I mean, thank you so much for being here. And it was a wonderful and informative session so far. So is there anything you would like to add on to this? Just to wrap up.
Well, it's been a real pleasure speaking to you. It's a shame we can't see the people we're speaking to, obviously, but it's been really nice to be here. If you have any questions, please get in touch through Preeti, through SIUK. We're happy to help where we can. And thank you very much for your attention and for listening.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us, and hopefully next time we'll see you either in Newcastle or in India.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, SIUK, for making this happen, and we really acknowledge all your support. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Preeti, Dr. Patrick, and Dr. Garrett. Thank you everyone for participating in the webinar today. Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you. Bye.